you, Joel Seedman.
He's a shameless, egotistical maniac.
I don't know how you got your PhD.
I thought shit was meant to be for the toilet.
God, you post some stupid shit.
I feel like this dude might drink urine for the health benefits.
No wonder he's still built like a cheese string.
Doing nothing. Waste of life.
So stupid. I hate you so
Sending heat
much.
from Australia.
Rubbish.
Hey guys, Dr. Joel Seedman here, PhD in kinesiology. I'm really excited about today's video because I'm going to be discussing my own personal journey in this industry and how I got to where I am today, particularly looking at 90-degree eccentric isometrics. And I wanted to show how this wasn't just something that I casually or randomly stumbled upon, but it's something that had a very specific journey and points of realization. Now, I started strength training when I was around 14 years old, and pretty much like every high school and teenage young boy, my goal was just to build muscle and to not be frail. I was pretty thin, pretty scrawny. I also had scoliosis, and I wanted to try and help myself with that. Technically, I still do have scoliosis, but at the time I thought, well, my body doesn't feel very good. I'm weak and frail. So I started doing strength training by emulating what I found in the bodybuilding magazines. Flex Muscle Magazine, Muscle and Fitness, Men's Health, all the different Joe Weider publications. I basically went through those religiously and started following all the big bodybuilders from Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler, Kevin LeBron, Dexter Jackson, Sean Ray, Gunther, Marcus Rule. I mean, I was a fanatic with all those. I knew who all the bodybuilders were. Lee Priest, I followed all of their routines to the T. And little did I know that they were getting the results they were getting because they were on steroids, and they also had freakish genes. So I did gain some good muscle mass, and I probably put on 20 to 25 pounds of muscle the first several years when I started training and incorporating these methods. But I quickly came to a plateau and realized I wasn't gaining any more muscle or strength. When I was 18, I had a very unique journey of looking at some of Mike Mentzer's different books and his training methods. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a massive fan of his particular methods, although I do find a lot of value in them. It's more his philosophy and understanding that you had to look at the training methods outside the box, because traditional training methods actually led to more failure and more failed attempts amongst people who tried to get into strength training and tried to get into bodybuilding, and they were responsible for more failed attempts than any other training method. So Mike Mentzer basically said, hey, think outside the box. Maybe the way we're doing things isn't the perfect way to strength train or to bodybuild. So his books really got me to think differently. And then that really got me into pursuing my degree in kinesiology. When I was 18, I went to Indiana University, did my degree in exercise science. And what was really cool about that is I got to take what I was learning in the classrooms and apply it to my clients, because at 18, I also started personal training. So it was a very unique experience for me and very invaluable, because I got to take what I was learning in the classrooms and apply it firsthand. My clients got good results, and I was doing things by the books. Everyone was doing full range of motion or large range of motion, or the maximal pain-free range of motion they could achieve. Oftentimes, my clients would do ass to grass squats or deep squats, because I believed at the time that was the best way to squat. We were using the muscle-mind connection, really focus on trying to squeeze the muscles that we were intending to target, just as all the bodybuilders were teaching. And even in the classrooms, they were teaching that there was some validity to that. And I was doing traditional strength training splits, chest, back one day, arms the next day. Clients got good results or decent results. I wasn't satisfied, especially because a lot of my clients had different nagging aches and pains, and even started to get little injuries that in my mind didn't really make sense, especially if I was doing things by the books. And strength training was supposed to be a therapeutic modality that helped the body. Why were some of my clients and even myself feeling the negative ramifications of traditional strength training and traditional bodybuilding methods? This is where things started to change for me, because around 24, 25 years old, my body really began to break down. Again, for everyone, it happens at a different age. For me, it was 24, 25, but I started to notice things with my knees, my hips, my low back, my shoulders, my neck. Pretty much every area of my body began to feel pain. I started to have numerous injuries to the point that I had to really dial back my training volume. I could only squat once every few weeks. I could only deadlift once every few weeks. If I tried to hit a particular muscle group or area of the body more than once a week, my joints would feel very inflamed. I'd have to continually take days off. I was constantly getting sick, constantly having upper respiratory infections because my immune system was getting worn down, which is not uncommon for people that participate in intense strength training routines. And so my body was letting me know something was not right. This led me to start investigating the training methods a bit more scientifically, and again, thinking more outside the box and trying to understand and comprehend why were all these things happening to my body, and even to my clients, why were these things happening to them. And so I started to look more at the literature on structural muscle physiology and neuromuscular physiology and biomechanics, because in my mind, if traditional training methods weren't doing the job, perhaps it had something to do more with the technique of how people were doing the movements, of how I was doing the particular repetitions and the execution of the actual reps. Every time I would do a squat, my hips, my knees, my low back would be killing me. It didn't matter how I programmed them, didn't matter how long I took off. My technique, according to the bros in the gym, even according to different training experts, was very solid. I had a good, strong, solid, deep astrograph squat. My range of motion was good on everything. By all accounts, I had good technique, but my body was telling me otherwise. Everything was hurting. Everything was inflamed. My whole body was breaking down. So this is where I started to look at the literature on proprioception and muscle spindles. And muscle spindles are these little feedback mechanisms embedded within our muscles that give us sense of feel, or proprioception, and kinesthetic awareness. So it allows us to really tune into our body's positioning and to fine tune our positioning. So this led me to go a little bit deeper into some of the literature, and I basically ended up doing my PhD because I wanted to go even further along with this and find out kind of what the research was saying for myself, not someone else or another professional telling me how to interpret the literature or how to do things because, well, this is how we've been doing them for the last several decades. I wanted to go in, look at the research for myself, basically draw my own conclusions and develop my own training methods, not on what other people were telling me to do. Now, I mentioned muscle spindles, and muscle spindles, those respond to stretch. Muscle spindles respond to the amount of stretch you place upon them and how fast that stretch is and the degree of stretch. My mindset was, okay, well, if I need to activate my muscle spindles, and stretch is the key mechanism that activates those spindles, then the more stretch, the better, right? So for about 2 years, I was pushing my mobility and range of motion and really emphasizing the stretch on pretty much all of my exercises and all of my movements because, again, the science says you got to activate the muscle spindles, and to do that, more stretch. And what would happen is initially things would feel pretty good. They would open up. My body would start to gain a little bit more mobility. And then within a few hours or even a few days, everything would come back tighter and I would be in even more pain. But my mindset was, well, okay, maybe I just need to stretch a little bit further. Maybe I need to open up my body a little bit more. And I would do it. And for about 30 minutes or an hour or two, it would feel better. But then those muscles would come back with a vengeance, even tighter. But again, because everyone else was saying, well, you got to stretch the muscle, you got to improve your mobility. And the only way to do that is to increase your range of motion, to keep pushing those boundaries of mobility. Basically, it was a vicious cycle. The more I stretched, the larger the range of motion I got into, the more pain and tightness I created. But I thought, wow, to get rid of that, I just have to stretch further. I have to get deeper. I need more range of motion. And it got to the point where my body was in so much pain, I was like, okay, this could not possibly be it. There can't be truth to this, because my body was feeling worse and worse. And I even noticed the same trends in clients who I was using this with, as well as other trainers mentioning similar trends with their clients. Now, I started to go through the research a bit more specifically and a little bit more closely because, again, my body was hurting and something wasn't right. I quickly noticed that the literature in biomechanics, in structural muscle physiology, and in neuromuscular physiology, there were certain things pointing to this optimal range of motion being what's better for humans rather than this maximal range of motion. Even when I started to look at muscle spindles and them responding to stretch, what I started to find when I went deeper into the literature is that muscle spindles also respond to stiffness, and that if there is not a level of stiffness, that muscle spindles actually don't activate. And if you overstretch a muscle, you lose stiffness properties. That means overstretching a muscle, you have less muscle spindle activation, and you also have less overall muscle activation, less motor unit recruitment. You also place yourself into more biomechanically disadvantageous positions when you start to look at lever principles and anatomical levers. And so even when you look at structural muscle physiology, I started to notice this. If a muscle is overly stretched or overly shortened, it doesn't fire well either. So all the literature started to point to this concept of, maybe we shouldn't be overstretching a muscle, but taking a muscle through a more natural length. And again, the deeper I went, I started to notice that this 90-degree principle started coming up more and more in the research and in the science. So I started to apply this concept on my own body. Now, the 90-degree thing, I wasn't as sold on specifically. I was just more tuned into this idea that these methods and these movements need to be a bit more compact, and that I didn't necessarily have to force the range of motion as much as I thought. So I started using that in my own body and started to see some nice progress in terms of my pain and my symptoms and my injuries started to get better. Also noticed similar things with my own clients. We also started to gain a little bit more muscle and strength because we were able to handle heavier loads more safely. What ended up happening is you move forward about 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, my body started to break down again. I started to have signs of inflammation. My joints were killing me, my knees, my hips, my low back. So even though I shortened my range of motion, it wasn't ideal because I wasn't adhering as well or as specifically to the 90-degree method as I should. And once we started implementing the 90-degree method very precisely based on the science, not on what people in the field were saying that I needed to do, but based on the science itself, my body began to really heal itself for the first time. Not just feel a little bit better and to kind of start opening up or starting to see signs of improvement, but it really started to heal itself to the point where I became pain-free. And I noticed the same thing with my other clients. Their injuries started to heal themselves. And this started to kind of blow my mind. It started to blow even my clients' minds. And this really led to what I'm doing today with the 90-degree eccentric isometric method. So once I really started to look at all of the literature, not just some of it or parts of it, but all of the areas of kinesiology as a whole, I looked at the principles of structural muscle physiology and how muscle fibers overlap. And if a muscle is overly stretched or overly shortened, it doesn't fire or activate to its optimum and you actually lose force production. Also, when we started to look at biomechanics and look at things like anatomical levers, and we would see basically that 90-degree positions maximized anatomical leverage as well as elastic energy. When you went past 90 degrees, you actually placed yourself into these biomechanically disadvantageous positions. And then when you looked at things like neuromuscular physiology, of how the nervous system worked with the muscles themselves, you noticed that you actually had the most sense of feel or proprioception from those muscle spindles at roughly 90 degrees. So all of the literature started pointing to the same thing. Then we started to implement it with our clients. I started to implement it on my own body. I want to use the squat as an example because for me, the squat was always an exercise that I had a lot of pain and discomfort. Once I was about 24 years old up until roughly 27, 28, I would feel it in my hips. I would feel it in my knees. I would feel it in my low back to the point that some days I would just have to forfeit doing squats altogether. Once I started going from ass to grass squats or really deep squats to roughly parallel, like I said, I started to see some good improvement. Joints started to feel better. And I also noticed my leg development began to increase because I was actually activating my muscles a lot more intensely, a lot more efficiently. But again, after a certain point of time, the parallel squat, I started to feel issues once again, not as bad as with the deep squats, but my body didn't feel perfect. So we started to make the movements and the motions a bit more compact. We started to go slightly above parallel. Body started to feel even better. Finally, we went to, okay, roughly 90 degrees, and my body didn't just feel better, but it began to heal itself completely to the point that I no longer had hip pain, knee pain, low back pain. And we noticed the same trend with our clients and people who we would bring into the laboratory. So this was kind of a mind-blowing experience because everybody's body was benefiting with the 90-degree principle, and everybody's body was gravitating to these 90-degree joint angles, particularly when we had them really clean up their posture and keep perfect alignment, because to go past 90 degrees, they would have to sacrifice that. The same thing on bench press, where I would have just crazy pain in my shoulders and in my bicep tendons and even in my neck. Once we started to go from those deep ranges of motion where we would be overstretching at the bottom, even using a cambered bar for extra stretch. And once we started to go to more abbreviated ranges of motion, particularly 90 degrees, our bodies began to heal itself. Now, I want to mention that during the ages of roughly 18 to 26, 27, I tried so many training methods and training protocols and looked at pretty much what every fitness expert or strength and conditioning specialist was doing in the industry. I tried everything from what the guys on T Nation were writing about. I followed and still do follow Christian Thibodeau, Eric Cressy, Tony Gentilcore, Louis Simmons, Charles Poliquin, Charles Staley. I mean, I was literally trying to get my hands on every type of training method that I could and basically learn from what the experts before me were doing and what they were saying, because I knew it would be helpful for me. I also looked at some of the older kind of old school science like Arthur Jones and Mike Mentzer, as I mentioned previously. Arthur Jones, really from like the 70s to the 80s, he really developed some very cool kind of groundbreaking ideas on strength training and kinesiology, and the heavy duty, high intensity protocol where you didn't need as much volume, you didn't need to do as many sets, you could just basically use intensity to create muscle growth. So I tried all these different methods. I also tried Jay Schroeder and Adam Archuleta method. And if anyone's not familiar with that, Adam Archuleta came out in his draft, I believe it was in the early 2000s, and blew everyone away because he was doing this specific type of training that Jay Schroeder was taking him through with these deep stretches. And again, this kind of got me on this path of doing these deep stretch positions, which again, my body felt okay at first and then eventually it didn't. But my point is, I tried everything and I eventually ended up at the 90-degree method because this is not just what worked best on my body, it's what worked best on everyone's body who I was training. So this kind of leads me to the last 10 years. I'm almost 40 years old and I graduated with my PhD when I was roughly 28 or 29. And I've been personal training these last 21 years, but really the last 10, 11 years, I started my own business in the Atlanta area. And I have been blessed with the opportunity to basically take what I learned doing my PhD in kinesiology and this whole 90-degree method and refine it more over these years, but also apply it to a variety of populations, from general populations to bodybuilders, pro athletes, college athletes, even younger adolescent athletes, as well as special populations and people with various types of injuries. But what's been very cool over these last 10 years is that I've essentially developed a niche for myself in this industry, working with people who are unable to overcome various forms of pain and injury and musculoskeletal issues with traditional methods. They were unable to get rid of the pain. They were unable to have any resolve, even with medical intervention and different types of physical therapy modalities. So oftentimes I've been the last resort for a lot of my clients over the years that they've tried everything and they heard about my methods and they want to try me and see, hey, they got nothing to lose. Everything else they tried, traditional methods, large range of motion, working on pushing their mobility and stretching the muscles further. It didn't help. It only made them worse. So why not give Dr. Joel Seedman's method and the 90-degree eccentric isometric a try? And what's been awesome over these last 10 years is that we've seen unbelievable and almost miraculous results of people's bodies being healed from these methods. And honestly, it's nothing fancy that I've done. I've just been applying the science, and we've basically been letting the training methods produce and provide the healing that these people need. And again, I'm a big believer in God, and I believe that when we use our bodies the way God intended us to, It brings healing and health and restoration. Now, the level of healing and restoration that we were seeing with the clients that were applying these 90-degree eccentric isometrics, it was so phenomenal. I've basically limited my training over the last 5-6 years where I don't really take on new clients except people who have injuries. I am not really taking on general populations or people that just want to get fit. It's pretty much if they don't have an injury they've not been able to overcome with other methods, then I essentially don't work with them. Or if it's a significant injury that they need help with, those are the types of clients that I've gravitated to because I've seen that these methods are so effective and they're so beneficial for people's bodies and for healing injuries. Those are the types of clients that I've been working with predominantly, as well as pro athletes. But pretty much all the pro athletes who seek me out, they seek me out because their fellow teammates or other pro athletes who had injuries and were unable to resolve those injuries with other methods, they found the 90-degree method healed their bodies and allowed them to play their sports at the highest level pain-free when they previously had many injuries that they were dealing with. And ultimately, that's how I've developed a relationship with a lot of these pro athletes and kind of worked my foot into the door with the NFL and Major League Baseball and NBA and other professional sports. Is the methods work. The athletes tell their friends, they tell other athletes, and as a result, I have professional athletes seek me out, and once they try the methods, even just a few sessions, they're sold because they immediately start to feel the benefits in their body. Now, some of you watching this might be thinking, well, I don't have an injury, or I don't care about tissue health, or being an athlete. I just want to gain more muscle. I just want to gain more strength. Well, here's the cool and crazy thing that we've noticed over the last 10 years with our athletes, and I've noticed with my other clients and even people who have no interest in gaining any muscle mass or strength or size. When we start applying the 90-degree eccentric isometrics predominantly for healing and for restoration and helping people overcome injuries, we notice a very cool side bonus in that they gain insane levels of muscle mass and strength. This is without steroids. We don't even have them taking any supplements other than maybe protein powder. Some people, if they want to take creatine, they're gaining almost unbelievable amounts of muscle mass to the point that I've been a little bit careful over the years expressing those numbers on social media because I know the haters, they love that. And a lot of my critics, they don't believe, or they say I'm fabricating this. We've had people gain 15, 20 pounds of muscle in a matter of just a few months just from using the 90-degree eccentric isometrics method and trying to get their body healthy. But this is the cool thing about this training method, is that when you use your body the way it's intended to, and when your body gets healthy, and when you're training it with 90-degree angles, you're actually maximizing motor unit recruitment, which is basically a fancy neuromuscular way of saying you have more muscle activation. And when you have more muscle activation, you can handle heavier weights, and you're recruiting more muscle fibers so you can grow more muscle, and those heavier weights lead to greater strength gains, and they lead to inevitably more muscle mass as well. And it also helps with athletic performance, and all the muscle mass that's gained, it's functional muscle tissue because we're not doing high reps of bodybuilding methods. These are all functional movement patterns that we're using to gain this type of muscle. Now, something else that's very interesting to note about my training is that I never stretch, I never foam roll, I never do mobility drills, I never do any type of soft tissue work or any type of other therapeutic modality to get my body to feel better. It basically always feels good, and when it doesn't, or it feels a little bit off, or something's a little bit tight or stiff, I simply go back to the 90-degree eccentric isometric method, and that brings healing to my body. It helps things get loose. It restores anything that was out of balance or out of alignment so that I don't need to go do foam rolling or stretching or get a massage. Basically, the 90-degree method provides all the natural therapeutic restoration that my body needs, and I can even sprint and do intense physical exercises without warming up because my body is so healthy. So again, it all goes back to the 90-degree method, basically healing my body and optimizing my physiological function. As we get ready to wrap up this video, I just want to say that it's to the point now where there are a lot of critics and a lot of people who maybe don't agree with my methods, but I feel so strongly about these methods and the 90-degree principles and what I've been doing with my athletes and my clients and even my own body, and we've seen such phenomenal results. It would be kind of selfish for me not to present this even further and to get this out to the audience and to the world even more. I want more people to benefit from this. I want more people's lives to be changed by these methods, and I want more people's bodies to get fixed and to be pain-free just like I am. I want people to be able to enjoy training. I want people to be able to enjoy physical health without worrying that they're going to injure themselves every time they go to the gym. So I think the future now is I want to start doing more content like this. I want to go deeper into the science and explain more to you, the audience, that you can have all the tools you need to equip yourself for maximal living and for maximal advanced human performance.